California is approaching a housing inflection point that few residents fully understand and even fewer are prepared for. By 2026, a series of housing rules, enforcement deadlines, and regulatory changes will fully take effect, altering how homes are rented, insured, repaired, and approved across the state. These rules were not introduced overnight. Many were passed quietly years ago. What is changing now is timing, enforcement, and economic pressure converging all at once. For renters, homeowners, seniors, and working families, the impact will not arrive as a single event. It will unfold through rent increases, insurance withdrawals, compliance costs, and shrinking housing options. In many cases, displacement will not come from eviction notices, but from housing becoming financially or legally unlivable. This breakdown examines the top 10 housing rules and policy shifts now accelerating toward 2026. They are ordered by scale, urgency, and population exposure, from early warning signs to the most severe, unavoidable consequences. Each section explains what is changing, who is affected, why it matters now, and what happens when households are unprepared. The pattern that emerges is clear. This is not one housing problem. It is many, converging at the same time. Tenant relocation rules quietly take effect. California's expanded tenant relocation requirements represent one of the earliest warning signs in the broader housing shift now accelerating toward 2026. Beginning in 2025, more situations trigger mandatory relocation assistance when renters are displaced due to renovations, habitability repairs, or certain no-fault evictions. What makes this change significant is not just the rule itself, but how widely it now applies. Smaller multi-unit buildings and older rental properties that were previously exempt are increasingly covered. The purpose of relocation assistance is to reduce sudden financial harm to tenants. Payments are intended to help cover moving expenses, temporary housing, storage, and related costs when a unit becomes temporarily or permanently uninhabitable. On paper, this appears protective. In practice, the rule collides with one of California's most persistent problems: limited housing availability. For renters, especially those living in older housing stock, relocation often means entering an extremely competitive market with few vacancies. Long-term tenants, seniors, and lower-income households are most exposed. Even when relocation payments are provided, they do not guarantee access to comparable housing nearby. In many cases, tenants are unable to return once repairs are completed, effectively turning temporary displacement into permanent relocation. Landlords face growing compliance costs. Relocation payments can reach thousands of dollars per unit, and when repairs involve multiple units, expenses multiply quickly. Small property owners operating on narrow margins are particularly affected. Many respond by delaying non-emergency repairs, scaling back upgrades, or selling properties altogether. Each response reduces rental stability or housing supply. The broader impact is subtle but important. Deferred maintenance worsens building conditions over time. Property sales can remove units from the long-term rental market or reset rents beyond what displaced tenants can afford. At the same time, enforcement is increasing. More funding for inspections and tenant outreach means violations are more likely to be identified and penalized. This issue ranks lower on the list because it does not affect every household at once. However, it establishes a recurring pattern seen throughout the housing system. Policies meant to protect tenants can still produce instability when housing supply is tight and compliance costs rise. As these pressures accumulate, the margin for error narrows, setting the stage for larger, more widespread disruptions ahead. Number 9. Parking mandate rollbacks disrupt local housing approvals. California's rollback of minimum parking requirements near major transit corridors was designed to accelerate housing construction and reduce development costs. Beginning in 2025, cities are restricted from requiring a set number of parking spaces for many new residential projects. While the policy aims to encourage density and faster approvals, its rollout has produced unintended disruption across local planning systems. Many cities have not updated zoning codes or permitting processes to reflect the new rules. This has created confusion between state mandates and existing local regulations. Developers often face delays as projects move through approval systems that are not aligned with the law. Housing intended to be built faster is instead stalled in planning review, appeals, or legal uncertainty. For renters, The promised benefit more housing supply has been uneven. Some transit-rich areas see progress, while suburban and inland communities experience little near-term relief. Homeowners and existing residents raise concerns about street congestion, limited parking availability, and strain on local infrastructure, particularly where transit access remains limited. Local governments face growing pressure. Failure to comply with state law exposes cities to legal challenges, while rapid approvals without infrastructure, planning risk overwhelming streets, utilities, and emergency services. Community opposition often intensifies when residents feel density is increasing without coordination. This issue matters because it directly affects the future housing pipeline. Delays at the approval stage compound over time, limiting how much new housing actually reaches the market. While parking reform is less immediately destabilizing than displacement, it slows relief precisely when demand is rising, allowing pressure to continue building toward 2026. Height. Short-term rental crackdowns reduce housing flexibility. California's tightening enforcement against short-term rentals is reshaping local housing markets faster than many residents expected. Cities are expanding data-sharing agreements with booking platforms and increasing compliance checks to identify unpermitted rentals operating in residential neighborhoods. By 2025, enforcement is broader, faster, and less reliant on complaints, making non-compliance harder to avoid. The policy goal is to return housing units to the long-term rental market. In theory, removing short-term rentals should increase availability for local residents. In practice, the transition has been uneven. Many homeowners relied on short-term rental income to offset rising mortgages, insurance premiums, and maintenance costs. When that income disappears suddenly, financial pressure builds quickly. Some properties do convert to long-term rentals, but many do not. Units may be sold, left vacant, or held off the market while owners reassess regulations and costs. In higher-cost areas, long-term rental rates needed to cover expenses often remain out of reach for average renters. As a result, supply does not rebound immediately and affordability does not improve evenly. Renters expecting quick relief often encounter continued competition and limited options. At the same time, small property owners face financial strain that can lead to deferred maintenance or forced sales. This creates a period of instability where both renters and owners are vulnerable. This issue matters because it removes flexibility from the housing system. Short-term rentals once acted as a financial buffer for owners and an adjustable supply source. As enforcement tightens without equivalent long-term housing growth, pressure shifts elsewhere, setting the stage for deeper instability as costs continue rising toward 2026. Number 7. Property insurance withdrawals make homes financially unlivable. Property insurance has become one of the most under-recognized drivers of housing instability in California. By 2025, insurance companies are continuing to withdraw from wildfire-prone and high-risk regions, sharply limiting coverage options for homeowners and landlords. For many households, this shift is not gradual, it is sudden, expensive, and difficult to navigate. Insurance is not optional for most properties. Mortgage agreements require active coverage, and when private insurers exit a region, homeowners are often forced into high-cost insurance pools or partial coverage plans. Monthly housing costs rise sharply, even for households that have not changed their mortgage or rent. For fixed-income homeowners and retirees, these increases can quickly become unsustainable. The impact spreads beyond individual owners. Homes without affordable insurance are harder to sell or refinance, slowing transactions and reducing mobility. Landlords facing higher premiums often pass costs on to renters where allowed, reduce maintenance, or remove units from the rental market altogether. In some areas, entire neighborhoods experience declining property values as insurance availability shrinks. This issue matters now because insurance instability undermines housing at its foundation. Even households that can afford their monthly payments may face default if coverage lapses. Unlike rent increases or zoning changes, insurance withdrawals can happen rapidly, leaving little time to adjust. As insurance pressure intensifies, it reduces housing options across ownership and rental markets alike. That loss of stability feeds directly into affordability challenges, making the next pressure point unavoidable as rent adjustments reset across the state. Number 6. Rent cap resets accelerate affordability erosion. California's statewide rent cap law limits how much landlords can raise rents each year, but those limits are recalculated annually based on inflation. As the state moves through 2025 and toward 2026, higher inflation metrics allow for larger legal rent increases across many regions. While still capped, these adjustments compound affordability pressure for millions of renters. For households already spending a large share of income on housing, even moderate increases can destabilize budgets. Seniors on fixed incomes, low-wage workers, and long-term tenants are particularly exposed. Rent increases may be legal, predictable, and incremental, but their cumulative effect steadily erodes housing security over time. Unlike sudden eviction, this pressure builds quietly. Renters respond by cutting back on essentials, postponing healthcare, or taking on additional roommates. Some relocate farther from employment centers to find lower rents, increasing transportation costs and commute times. In low-vacancy markets, renters often have few alternatives, making each increase harder to absorb. Landlords view rent adjustments as necessary to offset rising costs. Insurance premiums, maintenance expenses, property taxes, and regulatory compliance have all increased. In rent-controlled environments, allowable increases are often the primary tool owners have to maintain financial viability. This creates tension between affordability goals and operational realities. This issue matters now because other housing options are shrinking at the same time. Insurance withdrawals, short-term rental enforcement, and ADU losses reduce flexibility. When rent increases occur in a constrained market, displacement risk rises even without eviction. As affordability erodes across multiple years, pressure intensifies, pushing the housing system closer to a tipping point as 2026 approaches. Number 5. ADU compliance deadlines shrink flexible housing options. Accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, have played a critical role in absorbing housing pressure across California over the past several years. State laws made it easier for homeowners to add backyard cottages, garage conversions, and in-law units, creating relatively affordable housing without large-scale development. As the state approaches 2026, that flexibility is beginning to contract. New compliance deadlines now require many existing ADUs to meet updated safety, utility, and permitting standards. Units built quickly under earlier, more relaxed rules may need electrical upgrades, fire safety improvements, or formal utility separation to remain legal. For many homeowners, the cost of retrofitting can be substantial. Faced with high compliance costs, some owners choose to remove ADUs from the rental market entirely. Others delay upgrades, creating uncertainty for tenants. Renters living in informal or marginally compliant ADUs face heightened risk of displacement, often without the protections available in larger apartment buildings. The impact is concentrated among groups that relied heavily on ADUs. Seniors aging in place, multi-generational families, students, and immigrant households seeking lower-cost housing. As existing units are taken offline and new construction slows, one of the state's most adaptable housing sources begins to shrink. This issue matters because ADUs functioned as a release valve. When rents rose elsewhere, ADUs absorb demand. As that valve tightens, pressure shifts back onto an already constrained rental market, accelerating displacement risk as California moves closer to 2026. #4. State housing enforcement overrides local zoning control. California is now actively enforcing housing element requirements, marking a turning point in how housing development is governed at the local level. Cities are required to plan for and approve a specific number of housing units. While these rules have existed for years, enforcement was often delayed or uneven. As the state approaches 2026, that leniency has ended. Jurisdictions that fail to meet housing approval targets face significant consequences. One of the most impactful is the loss of local zoning control through provisions such as the builder's remedy. In non-compliant cities, developers can bypass local zoning rules if projects include required levels of affordability. This allows housing projects to move forward with limited local discretion. For renters, enforcement is intended to accelerate housing production. Over time, this may increase supply. In the short term, however, the effects can be disruptive. Housing approvals may surge faster than infrastructure investment, placing strain on roads, utilities, schools, and emergency services. Construction activity increases, before communities are fully prepared to absorb it. Homeowners experience this shift as reduced predictability. Neighborhoods may change rapidly, with increased density, taller buildings, or altered land use occurring with little local input. While housing growth is necessary, the pace and scale of change can generate uncertainty and resistance. This issue ranks higher because it reshapes the structure of housing decision-making statewide. Cities cannot opt out, and delays carry escalating penalties. As local control diminishes and development accelerates unevenly, the system becomes less flexible, feeding directly into shortages in housing types that cannot be built quickly, including housing for seniors. Number 3. Senior housing shortages reach a breaking point. California's senior population is growing faster than any other age group, and housing supply is not keeping pace. By 2026, this gap is expected to widen significantly as more residents reach retirement age, while age-appropriate housing remains limited. Senior housing is not interchangeable with standard rental housing, and shortages in this segment create ripple effects throughout the entire housing system. Many seniors require housing that is accessible, close to healthcare services, and supported by on-site staff or nearby caregivers. New regulations governing accessibility, safety, and staffing standards are intended to protect residents, but they also raise operating and construction costs for providers. As a result, many senior housing operators are delaying expansion or focusing on higher income markets to remain financially viable. For seniors, the consequences are immediate. Waitlists for assisted living and independent senior housing are growing longer. Monthly costs are rising faster than fixed incomes, leaving fewer affordable options. Some seniors remain in homes that no longer meet their physical needs because no suitable alternatives are available. Others are forced to relocate far from family support networks, increasing isolation and health risks. Families absorb much of the impact. Adult children step into caregiving roles when housing options fall short, affecting employment and financial stability. Multi-generational households become more common, not by choice, but by necessity. This issue ranks high because seniors have limited flexibility. Unlike younger households, they cannot easily relocate, increase income, or tolerate unstable housing. As senior housing shortages intensify, pressure shifts to working families and essential services, directly feeding into the next and more severe housing challenge. Number 2. Workforce housing gaps undermine essential services. California's housing crisis is no longer affecting only individual households. It is increasingly disrupting the workforce that keeps communities functioning. Across healthcare, education, agriculture, and public safety, workers are finding it harder to live anywhere near their jobs. Housing costs have risen faster than wages in many essential sectors, creating a widening gap between employment locations and affordable housing. This gap first appears as longer commutes. Nurses, teachers, farm workers, firefighters, and emergency responders often travel hours each day to reach work. While manageable in the short term, extended commutes lead to fatigue, burnout, and higher turnover. Over time, workers seek jobs in more affordable regions or leave critical professions entirely. Healthcare systems feel the impact quickly. Hospitals and clinics report staffing shortages tied directly to housing availability. When positions go unfilled, wait times increase and patient care suffers. Schools face similar challenges as teachers struggle to remain in districts where housing costs exceed salaries. High turnover disrupts classrooms and increases recruitment costs. Public safety agencies face added risk. Firefighters and emergency personnel who live far from service areas may experience delayed response times during crises. Communities lose resilience when essential workers cannot live locally. This issue matters now because other housing pressures are compounding simultaneously. Rent increases, insurance instability, and shrinking housing options reduce workers' ability to adapt. Workforce housing gaps affect everyone, even those who are securely housed through reduced services and slower emergency response. This issue ranks just below the most severe outcome because it weakens entire systems. When housing instability undermines essential services, the consequences extend far beyond housing, setting the stage for the full convergence of pressures expected by 2026. Has shown 2026. Convergence when every housing pressure hits at once. By 2026, California's housing crisis reaches its most dangerous phase, not because of a single new law, but because multiple pressures converge at the same time. Rent adjustments, insurance withdrawals, regulatory enforcement, demographic demand, and shrinking housing flexibility all intensify simultaneously. What makes this moment different is that households lose the ability to adapt incrementally. Individually, each pressure has existed for years. Together, they reinforce one another. Rent increases strain monthly budgets just as insurance costs rise or coverage disappears. ADU losses remove affordable alternatives. Senior housing shortages limit downsizing options. Workforce housing gaps reduce service availability. State enforcement accelerates development, but new supply cannot arrive fast enough to offset immediate losses. For renters, displacement increasingly occurs without eviction. Housing becomes unaffordable, unavailable, or legally inaccessible. A single disruption, job loss, medical expense, rent increase, or insurance pass-through can push households beyond their limits. With vacancy rates low and alternatives shrinking, recovery becomes difficult. Homeowners face parallel constraints. Insurance instability affects mortgage compliance and resale options. Selling or refinancing becomes harder as buyers face the same risks. Aging homeowners looking to downsize encounter limited senior housing availability, trapping equity and reducing mobility. The defining feature of 2026 is rigidity. When flexibility disappears, stress accumulates faster and spreads wider. Communities become less resilient, not due to sudden collapse, but because too many safeguards fail at once. This outcome ranks highest because it is cumulative and unavoidable without preparation. It marks the point where housing instability shifts from a personal challenge to a system-wide condition, one that affects renters, homeowners, workers, and entire communities across California. Taken together, these 10 developments reveal a clear pattern. California's housing crisis is no longer driven by a single issue, but by multiple rules, costs, and enforcement timelines converging at once. Policies affecting renters, homeowners, insurance markets, development, and workforce housing are interacting in ways that reduce flexibility across the system. By 2026, housing instability is less likely to appear as sudden eviction and more likely to emerge through rising costs, limited options, and slow displacement. Staying informed is a form of preparation. Understanding how these pressures connect allows households to anticipate risk, plan earlier, and avoid being forced into reactive decisions as conditions tighten across the state.